Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And this is our special post-inaugural program here at Gay USA. And we're going to discuss the impact of the new Trump administration with a panel of leading activists and journalists for the full hour.
Reading from left to right, I hope the cameras can catch him that way. My old pal, Linda Villarosa. Thank you for being here, Linda. Award-winning journalist, author, editor, novelist, educator, currently running the journalism program at the City College of New York in Harlem. She has been an editor, executive editor of Essence. How many, was it 700 years ago that you wrote that article
yeah,
about coming out?
With my mother.
Yes, that was very famous at the time, but has written for Essence, Ebony, Ms., Salon, The Root, many others, and currently runs Villarosa Media with your mother and your sister, publishing African-American content in books, and I'm very interested to talk to you about the students you're teaching. You were also the science editor at the New York Times.
Assistant science editor. Don't give me a promotion.
I want to. And the author of Body and Soul, The Black Woman's Guide to Physical Health and Emotional Well-Being.
Yes, there will be no alternative facts on this show. James Essex, our old friend from the ACLU LGBT project. You're the director of it. Correct. You were one of the counsels in the Obergefell case and in the Doma case at SCOTUS. And you're the counsel in the Schroer v. Billington federal case on Title VII to get sex discrimination to include transgender. You won it. And in your youth, you were the editor-in-chief of the Harvard Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Law Review. Welcome.
In my youth, yes.
And to represent grassroots activists, all of them, apparently. Hal LeBron from Make the Road New York, a grassroots activist group here, and you are the LGBTQ justice organizer. You also work with the Globe program, which is an intergenerational program for Black and brown queer folk in Brooklyn. You are working on competent and accessible healthcare, language, racial, immigrant, LGBTQ justice issues, and organizing that combines art and activism to uplift people. And you believe in grassroots movements that are unapologetic and powerful.
I think you're in good company.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's start off by just talking about what, for a minute or two, what we're feeling at this point.
Linda?
What I was thinking about was what happened right after the election. And we were at home, all of us, our family was watching, and it was looking like it was not looking good. And I called my mother, because she was out of town. I said, "Mom, are you watching TV?" She says, "No, I fell asleep." I said, "Mom, he's gonna win. Hillary's not gonna win." And she was like, "What?" And she just burst into tears. My mother's 86, lived through the Depression, had a really hard childhood, and has, just been a really strong figure in my life. And then next to me, my son, who's 17, was weeping. And I just thought, oh my gosh, because I was going to say, oh, get on the phone and talk to your grandmother. Well, no, she's a mess. Don't talk to her. And so, but I was also cheered, because once my mother sort of pulled herself together, and my son too, both of them on each sides of the generations, my mother said, well, I got through, the Depression, and I got through, and she went through everything she survived, including civil rights, and said, we can do this. And then my son and I went to one of the protests the next day. And actually, on our way here, I dropped him off at the immigration march. He was going there, he's on his way there. And so I am really horrified and freaked out, but also cheered. I am a college professor, so I have a lot of access to a lot of students who, some of them are apathetic, confused, not sure what to do. They've only known Obama, and some of them are really angry. And they're just trying to figure out, they need, I'm going to put them in touch with you, because they really want to know, what do I do? What do we do about this situation?
We will get to all of that with any luck. James?
Well, I want to echo some of what Linda said, in the sense that, look, I think that we are facing challenges and attacks of epic proportions. This is, people are very scared. People should be very scared. There's a lot that the Trump administration can do that could be bad for LGBT people and for many other communities and issues that we all care about. I think that, that said, I think that we have to recognize both that we can do this. We have lived through dark times before, and including specifically on LGBT rights issues, the Reagan administration, the Bush administration, both of them, and going back much farther. But we have to recognize that we're in the midst of a shift here. We've been, in some sense, on offense with the help of the Obama administration. We made incredible progress, both in terms of policy and in terms of public opinion during the course of the last 8 years, decade, et cetera. But during that time, we need to remember, we've been on defense in Congress most of that time. We've been on defense, we're certainly on defense in the states right now on LGBT policy-related issues. And now we're going to be on defense with the federal government, the administration as well. And defense plays differently. You do different things, and we can talk about what those things may be, but I think that we need to stand up, we need to sort of believe that we can make a difference here, and we need to figure out how it is we engage on defense in this next moment.
Al?
Yeah, I mean, I feel similarly to what they've both mentioned. I think it's really important to continue talking about the political work that we can do and how we can take the momentum right now that's currently at a really high level, higher than we've seen in probably history, in our history, at least a younger history, of the millennials, and really turn it into something. I think that the Tea Party turned their rage into political action. I think that this is our time to turn our rage into political action. And while we have a lot of momentum on that side, with what you mentioned on my predominant grassroots work, I think it's extremely important for us to really build on our own concrete skills and our own network and our own ways to cope, perhaps outside of the systematic practices and systems that have already oppressed us, but on our own way of coming up with ways to really build our strength in our communities through education, through direct action, through mobilizing, and through really just understanding where we stand right now with everything that's going on. I think most people are feeling sort of a combination of rage, being overwhelmed, high levels of anxiety, but also extremely empowered because we've hit rock bottom with this. So we can only just come up from here, and I think we really need to build in ourselves.
It did really feel great to be out at the march this weekend, which turned out, I think, to be the largest march in the history of the United States. If you take in everybody across the country, well, that's very encouraging. But we have to learn how to take back power. We didn't have much power before this. Mm-hmm. We don't have most of the state legislatures. We didn't have the Congress before this, and we've let a lot of that go. And that means a kind of organizing. I like to do issues organizing, so you can make who's ever in office do the right thing. But I don't feel like I can lobby the Trump administration that they'll listen. We have to change who's in power, and that's going to be a lot of work. Everybody getting together, maybe making some compromises we didn't want to do. I also have felt we're almost getting to the point where we need a divorce in this country, where we somehow reorganize along different lines, because people are never happy on either side as a result of this.
Are you supporting a civil war? Or are we going to go back to that?
I don't want any no violence, no violence, because they have the guns.
They're on Trump's side, Brexit.
But I do, I agree with all of this, obviously, and I feel the rage. And I think you very politely explained how the system has failed us and how we really need to count on grassroots action. And I take a couple of examples. I'm not as old as your mother, but I'm getting there. And I remember the Nixon administration, and I remember how we ended the Vietnam War by having 1 million people go to Washington. So maybe this is the biggest, but I remember really big marches in the 70s that ended the Vietnam War by just demanding it of a Republican administration. And what I keep pointing out to people is, you don't think we can move the Republicans. I don't think we can move the Trump administration, but I do think we can move Congress with that kind of action. And I'm holding on to the example of the at least temporary stop on the destruction of the Independent Congressional Ethics Office, because people got immediately outraged, flooded Congress with phone calls, and scared them into stopping that. So I think if we have enough people mobilized, to me it's all about critical mass, and always has been.
But I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we need to do, in the sense that I mentioned before the shift in public opinion that we all know about in terms of the country's acceptance of LGBT people. And that hasn't gone away. And that is where our power is. And so one of the things that we have to do, again, talking about what do you do on defense, you know, when you're on offense, you're talking to the people who are about to make the decisions and you know about it in advance. When you're on defense, they don't tell you. They're not going to tell us what's going on. They're just going to do it. We need to both create an immediate response, just as you were talking about, and we need to create a context. And it's the two versions of the same thing. We need to create a context where they know in advance it's going to be hard for them to do some of the things that they would like to do. Trump has surrounded himself with a range of people with profoundly anti-LGBT agendas. They would like to implement them. We need to make it abundantly clear that it's going to be very politically difficult and politically painful for them to do that. And when they do, the first thing that's clearly anti-LGBT, we need to identify it, we need to name it, we need to call in those chits and use the public opinion that is on our side, because that's the only way to shut some of this stuff down prospectively.
I agree with that, but it also breaks my heart a little to hear you say it that way, because I don't want us to be sort of single issue selfish on this. I think it's ultimately unproductive and will get us in trouble. So I'd like us to put all of our narrower stuff in a larger context that lifts us all.
That lifts everybody. Look, and I endorse that agenda, but I think that we've got to, I mean, this is scrappy fighting, right? We've got to like, you know, win where we can. And I'm not saying we focus only on LGBT specific issues and forget about the racial justice issues and the immigrants' rights issues and the Muslim issues and all of that. Those are all issues that the ACLU, I've worked at the ACLU, we're a multi-issue organization, we care about all those things and working very hard on all those things. But I also think that we can't afford to not take advantage of the levers that we have. We need to do it in a way that doesn't leave anybody behind, but I think it's also irresponsible of us to not use the power that we have to protect the communities that we can protect.
Sure.
Well, I think that, I mean, one key thing that we need to know about this, and I feel like when this was being explained, and it often happens, that these issues are separated, and we forget about the intersectional lens, which I think is the most important, most critical right now. You know, when we think about LGBTQ specific issues, that is immigrant issues, that is racial issues. All those issues are affected. So when we're thinking about immigrant rights right now, or the mass deportation that could fall on us more than the Obama, we're talking about trans immigrant women who would be deported and potentially be killed in their home countries, and that's something that needs to be talked about. So that is an LGBTQ issue. So all these things happen all at once and can be talked about and can be focused with those lenses all at the same time.
What do you tell us about your experience on the ground on these issues as specifically part of the LGBTQ justice work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I mean, as a LGBTQ justice organizer, I work predominantly with, as you mentioned, the GLOBE Project, which is a youth-led. It is an intergenerational group, but it is Black and brown youth-led at this point. I also work very closely with the schools that are the high schools and middle schools that are around the Bushwick area where our office is located. So I support their gender and sexuality alliances. So we have these conversations all the time. And then we go back into our organization and have weekly meetings and do different actions and different groups to talk about the issues that are affecting us. And right now, I think the main things that we're focusing on, other than knowing on the political aspect, everything we have to push and how we have to really act at that level, is really gaining concrete skills ourselves in order to protect ourselves. So things that we've been talking about a lot is self-defense, bystander trainings. We're thinking about what skills we need to know, how much we need to educate ourselves on knowing our rights, not just on immigration for those who are immigrants, for those who are undocumented, for those who have those people in their lives, which are all of us, but also just on knowing our rights when it comes to the police, right? So all these things we're trying to just gain really concrete skills that we can apply, knowing that grassroots work has to happen at the same level as the political work.
And are you finding an appetite for action in the people you're working with?
They always have the appetite. They have an aggressive appetite, but I think that right now, yes, I think right now it's where we feel that there's a dire need to act, and I think it's definitely escalated.
And Linda, among your students, are you finding that?
Well, I run a journalism program, so what I'm trying to do is really talk about news literacy and talk about fake news, alternative facts, and just get them grounded so at least we can be literate when we're trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, if you have a person in control who uses lying as a defense a self-defense mechanism, a defense mechanism, an offense mechanism, then I have to be able to teach kids how to sort through how do you know what's real and how do you question, because none of us is used to that. And so when we're told, oh, don't listen to what he says, listen to what he does, it's like, well, he's saying things, and as we're media people, we have to cover what he's saying. But in the same time, he is doing this other thing. When he's on Twitter, something else is happening, and then he's talking to the CIA, and everybody's focused on his tweets.
And what's your understanding or analysis or feeling about how mainstream media is dealing with all this these days?
Well, it's interesting because there has been so much hand-wringing in my, social circles. So everybody's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? He's attacking a CNN reporter at his press conference. What's going on? Blah, 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 blah. But then in reality, and Tom Robbins was saying this, Tom Robbins, the great Village Voice investigative reporter who I went to a workshop of his recently, and he was saying, this is the time when you really rise to the occasion. When someone, this is great for journalism. Journalists are wonderful when there is a horrible challenge. When things are terrible, that's what we like. And so, it's like, oh my God, the more he challenges and the more he denigrates the media, it's like the more we want to correct him, challenge him, push back, and, basically do our job, which if he's grounded in alternative facts, we're grounded in real facts and reality and truth.
The great Wayne Barrett just died last week, and Tom Robbins wrote his obituary in the Village Voice, and he was only 71. I mean, he seemed like he was there forever, but he took, great pleasure in going after power, and he said, what a wonderful job to have where your job is to tell the truth and you get paid for it.
Yes. But we've also heard that in this strange Alice in Wonderland world we're living in, that that's exactly what the administration wants, is journalists with their hair on fire, and that is only playing into his hands in some way.
Well, as long as their hair is on fire and they're telling the truth, I'm fine. Your hair on fire makes you work faster.
And do you think the Times is doing an okay job by calling him a liar on the front page, or do they have a lot more to do?
I think that everyone at the Times, and I worked at the Times, it's a very thoughtful place. There's a lot of thoughtfulness. There's a lot of let's get together and talk as a group about how we're going to approach this and try to really make things. And so there is a lot of that. So I think that right now, it's a time of media constriction, so it's not only that there is this new reality on the way you report, but there's also like money problems. And so I think it's everything shaking out right now. I ran into Charles Blow. He lives in my neighborhood, and he writes that wonderfully angry column.
Wonderful columnist.
And I just hugged him, and I said, I don't know if people tell you this, but we are so grateful that you are out there and speaking out for all of us. And he is Mr. Intersectionality. And so I really appreciate the work he's doing and his courage, and for anyone who's doing that kind of work.
So people are feeling very unprotected, and they're basically anticipating no protection from the courts in the future. If Trump gets a hold of the Supreme Court, we don't know what's going to happen there. But the courts right now are, fairly liberal. Even a lot of Bush and Reagan justices ruled in our favor and things. How long does it take to dismantle that to where we don't have the protection of the courts?
Well, I think it's going to, over the course of 4 or 8 years, a president can have a significant impact on the sort of the tenor of the federal judiciary. I think there's 80 or so vacancies in the lower federal courts below the U.S. Supreme Court, which I think is a comparatively large number at a moment like this, and that's because the Senate has basically refused to fill vacancies for the last year. So Trump will have the ability to put a bunch of new people on. A bunch of those people will probably be fine. Some of them will not be good on LGBT and a range of other issues. So right now the U.S. Supreme Court and the other lower federal courts are the best they're going to be for a good while. And I think that means that the ACLU and other litigation-focused organizations are, we're like, okay, let's get what we can now. And I actually think that partly as a result of the significant change in public opinion around LGBT people and LGBT equality. I think that the sort of the change that may happen in terms of constitutional rights and interpretations of federal civil rights laws that may happen on a range of other issues may not happen as, it may not be as bad on LGBT rights. And I say that because, as you just mentioned, there are a number of solidly conservative judges on the federal courts of appeals who have voted the way the ACLU would think they should vote, the way we've urged them to vote, and others have urged them to vote, to protect LGBT rights. That LGBT rights are becoming more of a mainstream thing, and so I'm not saying I'm not worried about anything. I'm certainly very worried about the religious exemption side of things, that whole set of issues. On basic LGBT equality, I'm not as worried.
And talk about the religious exemption thing, because this is something that would affect all of us in an intersectional way. Essentially giving people the right, this is the bill that is before the Congress and that Trump supports.
And at the state level and all over the place.
That says if you have a sincere religious objection to doing, serving somebody or employing someone, that's okay. Not just LGBTQ, but you could have a religious objection to a woman who's divorced or, whatever.
Reproductive rights, contraceptive coverage, things like that. And not just churches, but anybody could assert a religious feeling.
And my question about that, does that override all local, state and local human rights laws if they pass a federal law like this?
Well, it depends on what the federal law is. The law I think you're talking about is the so-called First Amendment Defense Act, or FADA. Exactly. It's a terrible piece of legislation, as one of you mentioned. Trump campaigned on it, endorsed it in his campaign. Sessions is a co-sponsor. It is just about federal law. It doesn't override state non-discrimination laws, and it is focused on religious beliefs or moral beliefs about marriage being a man and a woman, and sex outside of heterosexual marriage being a sin.
It's like DOMA and being a federal only law, I guess.
Yes, and so look, they could try to write broader laws, and perhaps they will. At the moment, that's not what's there. Now, that said, there's a series of a lot of very bad religious exemption laws, all of which would affect LGBT people, some of which would affect a much broader array of people that have been introduced in the states. And this continues to be a growing trend in the states. So, for example, in 2014, there were 13 religious exemption bills proposed in the states. In 15, there were about 60. In 2016, there were 110. We're going up a curve here, and I don't think we've seen the end of that.
And we beat most of them back last year, even in places like Oklahoma and Texas. But there's a different atmosphere, and that's the big thing in the country right now. Now people say, well, Trump won. I can call you whatever I want. I can say whatever I mean, it's insane, but there it is.
Well, and this business of white Christian men are the biggest victims these days, and the people most oppressed. That's infuriating and enraging.
Yeah, and just to go back a little bit on employee discrimination, I was under the impression that FADA was for federal employment specifically.
It's not. It affects federal laws.
Okay. Well, I mean, just to insert if we're going to keep on calling the grassroots perspective here, I think this is a really important time to think about alternative economic opportunities. I think that is a really good time to discuss worker-owner cooperatives or different types of collectives, only to think of it as something outside of just our regular employment situation that goes state by state, or that federal law could be imposed on that. I think that we need to think about different ways that we can employ our communities and maybe the most marginalized people. So us at Make the Road, at one point, we were supporting worker-owner cooperatives, and we were supporting specifically one that was predominantly a trans-Latina worker cooperative. And I think these kinds of ideas of alternative employment, I think, are really important to sort of uplift and have these conversations at this moment.
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about self-care and us taking care of each other and not relying on daddy to solve all our problems, which I think we've done too much in this country anyway. We've looked too much to some kind of godlike figure to solve all our problems.
Right, and I think that for a lot of communities that wasn't even an option. You know, like the system doesn't even apply to a lot of people within our communities. Yeah. So I think it's important just to think outside of that completely. Ourselves, the resources that we have, the things that we know, we have a lot of collective knowledge. We have a lot of collective experience. We have options outside of what already exists. Not to say that we don't need to push on what already exists. We absolutely do. And I think there currently is a lot of momentum to do that. But we also have to start thinking about what we have to contribute for each other and what we can build ourselves.
I really agree with that, and I was thinking about something that Audre Lorde said. She said, I'm doing my work, you know, are you doing yours? And our work is different. Like what you do is really, I was thinking we need more lawyers. And then I was thinking we need more activists. And so we need more journalists. Yes, we need more of everyone. But also, I think we, because of our experience in earlier activism, will be the leaders. And also to sort of sidestep some of the mistakes we already made. On my Facebook page, I have a lot of black women, and so before the march in DC, people were saying, I'm not going, it's a white woman's march. And so I pushed back on that, and then also listened to what people were saying. Then after I came back, it was like, it was a white woman's march. So I was like, okay, please stop. On my page, go to your own page. But I also started thinking about it, it's like we really have to pay greater attention, especially people who have not done this kind of organizing before and just are really enraged and just want to jump in, to avoid some of the mistakes we made. I thought of Proposition 8 recently, and I was like, oh, what a crap show that was. And you know, some other things where we've made these mistakes, we've learned lessons, and we need to bring them to the movement. And I really love what you were saying. It's like we have power. We have power among young people. We have power, you know, in communities that are outside of off the mainstream grid. We have to pay attention to that and do that kind of work.
Well, you had some observations about the Women's March and in Washington on those grounds.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually went to the Washington, D.C. march, and one thing I really appreciated was that it was very intergenerational. There were youth, there were mothers with their youth, there were older folks, there were different gendered people, and I think that the organizers, when they first thought of the march and the intentions behind the march, they were very inclusive. I think they included a lot of different people who identified as women. They included trans women. They included women of color. I think all of that was there. I did have some observations that I did think it was a little bit co-opted by a predominantly white cis women group, and I think that it was a really great opportunity at that moment to uplift the idea that women, and to separate the idea of women and potentially their genitalia. And I think that was really done in the march. It was very emphasized by a lot of the people who turned out, the idea that woman has to have a vagina, for instance, and that being the imagery and what was visible. And I think that this would have been a really great opportunity to uplift the idea that woman doesn't necessarily have that, or not everybody could call their pussy, but that is not equal to a vagina. And just having those conversations about who we can uplift during these marches, and that being a really great opportunity to talk about the people that are in the margins, that are trans women, that are people of color. And I think the intention was there. And I think, again, you know, it was historic, and it really started the culture for this, and it could turn into something. But I think that, you know, there was some missed opportunities to really uplift, for instance, trans women with different bodies, or people with different bodies, and people of color.
I think it raises the constant tension between, are you reacting to the people who currently have power, who are talking in that kind of grabbing the pussy language, or do you redefine it for yourselves to create a new power and a new organization? I want to, before we get any further, I want to put up on the screen, if we can, the some websites that people can go to sign up to get daily or weekly suggestions of actions and marches and whatever that they can do. I've just written these down as they've come across my pages or email. Womensmarch.com is organizing post the marches.
And I hear April 15th is the next big one.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
MoveOn.org is sending regular notices to people about actions. DailyAction.org is another one, and SwingLeft.org. These are all websites you can go to and just sign up, and they'll send you regular information about how to be involved. And I think that's crucially important.
And we are providing on our screen and to our people on our email list all of your websites, at least, so that people can be in touch with you and the work you do.
Yeah. Now you are working. You've just been doing some work on a piece on black men and AIDS in the South.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about the issues around that and how that plays out here?
Well, about a year ago, the federal government released a study that said that if things go as they look like they're going, half of all black men who have sex with men will be HIV infected down the road. So that was an alarm bell. And so I started doing research for a story and went down to Mississippi and spent quite a bit of time there with a really wonderful organization called My Brother's Keeper, and was on the ground, and it was in some parts like the 80s. I was really upset after a while because I was seeing so many really ill people. And then I met probably 6 young black men who had gotten infected in the last several months. So they were newly infected, and they were, one was 17, they were really young. And there's been some attention, that there's been some money being raised, and sent there, and some focus on the South, but not enough. And I did all this before Trump was elected. And so now I'm actually really scared because I saw how people were hanging on, getting their medication, and if there was PrEP, they were getting it through, it's expensive. So anybody on PrEP was getting it, getting it subsidized. But even their medication. I had met this one guy, he was infected in July, and he didn't get on, he found out, he was diagnosed, but he didn't get care for a while. And I said, why didn't you get care? And he said, I couldn't afford the medication. I didn't understand how to apply for the services. And I'm thinking, oh my God, if that goes away, this guy has no medication.
And that is something affecting absolutely everybody.
That's right.
Which is the dismantling of Medicaid. They want to make Medicare for old people into a voucher program, which will kill an awful lot of older people off, including us soon enough.
Any minute now.
And even to fiddle with Social Security. I mean, and yet these people are going before, these people who want to be in the cabinet are going before, and they're not backing up on this. They're using fudgy language. Oh, we want to have access to everybody. Yeah, if you can pay for it. This is something collectively which affects the health of all of us. We need to push back on very, very hard.
And all eyes look at me.
Well, you're the one who said, see you in court.
Well, look, and I'm concerned about the healthcare stuff. I'm concerned, among other things, about people living with disabilities, for whom the impact here will be extraordinary. I don't know what the litigation angle is there. I think at the moment we're all trying to figure out, well, what does the replacement look like? And who does it help and who does it hurt? I agree with your concerns about the very little bit we've heard about the direction they're headed.
Well, it's it's price and health care and all of that, but it's sessions and civil rights. It's DeVos and education. It's I've made a list here. It's PUSDER and labor. It's Ben Carson and House.
Gore, civil rights.
Absolutely, under Sessions. It's Tillerson and international rights. He's going to destroy. We counted so much on the Obama, not just laws, but the Obama administration's attitude and what cases they would bring and what policies they would have. And all of that is being reversed immediately. Climate change.
Yeah, I think all of those are the many, many reasons that we should all be concerned and scared and motivated and activated. On focusing on the specifically LGBT-related civil rights stuff that the Obama administration did, there's a range of things, but a whole lot of what happened at the executive agency level So we want stuff through the courts, and that's not immediately going away. We want stuff through Congress, that's not immediately going away, and I'm not sure that either one of those things is going away. We want a bunch of stuff through administration, the administrative actions, and that stuff could easily go away.
Immediately, the federal contractors role.
Some of it could go away immediately through an executive order or withdrawal of guidance. Some of it, the stuff that happened through regulations, is stuff that they would have to go through the normal process, a notice and comment rulemaking process, so it would take a little while. But here, this brings me back to the religious exemptions thing we were talking about earlier. There are two big picture ways they could do this. They could simply take back the LGBT protections, which are most of them based on statutes that say you can't discriminate based on sex, and the agencies have said, well, a ban on sex discrimination covers LGBT people.
Right.
And that's true in the schools context and in the federal contractor context and in access to health care under the ACA and employment, et cetera. They could just take those back, but the other thing they could do is add a religious exemption in all those contexts, because none of them have a religious exemption. And that wouldn't obliterate the protection for everybody, but it would take it away in many, many contexts. It would pockmark those civil rights protections in a way that other civil rights protections are not pockmarked.
And we should say other than a standard religious exemption that allows the Catholic Church not to ordain women, although they should, but they don't have to under the law. I mean, there are...
Exactly. Religious freedom no, I thank you for that. Religious freedom is absolutely essential, a core part of the values of the country. It's protected by the Constitution, and it should be, but religious freedom doesn't give anybody the right to discriminate against other people or harm other people, and that's what we're talking about here.
Couldn't the courts at this point, I mean, again, if Trump gets a dominance in the courts, especially going after Roe v. Wade, but couldn't they also just declare the fetus or the zygote, a fertilized zygote, a human being with all the protections thereof, and abortion is over in this country?
They would have to go through the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes, I understand that, but I'm saying if they get a majority.
Could the court do that?
Could they push that issue to the U.S. Supreme Court? Yes, they could. Could they push the marriage issue back to the Supreme Court? Yes, they could.
Everything's up for grabs if they get enough people on the court.
Look, the spot that's open in the Supreme Court right now, let's just remember that it is a replacement for Justice Scalia, and Justice Scalia was,
The devil.
Justice Scalia was, not a progressive. And
that's why he has a job and I don't.
So this is an important appointment. The next appointment is the one that would potentially change the court in a very fundamental way.
The 3 80-year-old liberals.
Even Kennedy.
And Kennedy.
Right.
Yeah. As a swing vote.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah.
But the point I wanted to make about the religious exemption thing, and they could do it two ways. They could just take back the LGBT protections or do it through religious exemptions. This gets back to the power thing. Look, I think that we can use the fact that the country doesn't like LGBT discrimination, doesn't support that when it's blatant, to try to slow this stuff down. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that everybody understands that these religious exemption measures or anti-LGBT discrimination. That's why they are being proposed. That's why they would be implemented. And people need to understand that, so we have the same kind of public reaction when they do it this way that would happen if they do it through simply repealing those protections.
And of course, in terms of taking back power, we weren't doing so well before. But with Jeff Sessions at the Justice Department, forget about any kind of protection of any voting rights and all these laws to restrict people from voting, which help very much Trump win the election, especially in the Rust Belt. It's going to be very, very difficult.
Well,
do people have? My question is, do people have an appetite for political organizing, to electoral politics, to get power back? I mean, we all know how mad we are about all these issues, and all the things you're proposing are great, and we're going to have to do them to preserve ourselves during this. But are people going to want to spend some time on?
Some people are, and I think the thing to keep in mind is that we should all do what does appeal to us. Some people will want to work on electoral politics. Some people will want to work on street activism. People will want to organize in their communities. Other people will want to work at different levels. But we really have to not condemn each other for making the choices we make, and really support each other on all those approaches, because we need all those approaches.
Okay.
Well, you know, all this talk we're hearing this week about, you know, Trump saying 3 to 5 million people voted illegally, and the arguments in the press about, you know, how can he say that there's no evidence? But really, the point is not for him to prove that. The point is for him to scare people into approving new voter ID laws, just so we're sure that that is not happening.
Voter ID laws that are intended to and do, in fact, disenfranchise disproportionately people of color.
Absolutely. And anyone else they can cut out across the board who is not a Trump voter.
I do think our challenge will be, I mean, you know, this new administration and its leader is a flamethrower on so many different issues. And so, you know, often when I'm talking to my students, and they, you know, they're like, how do we think about this? And I said, look at who is, you know, he's against. Look at who he's against. So look at all the things. So it's this group, this group, this group, this group, this group. That's everybody. And so that's how you need to think of it. Don't think, oh, it's just my issue. That it's like, this is one big hot mess. But we're one big group who don't agree. And I actually think this horrible healthcare business is going to be the turning point for people, the way we've described it. When people, I mean, if people are confused, it's like, well, I hate Obamacare, but I love affordable care.
Yes, yes.
So
I'm safe because I have the Affordable Care Act,
Yeah.
so I'm glad they're getting rid of Obamacare.
So when
Some care at least.
when things start to hurt people individually, and it's terrible, but you know, and it's going to hurt the people who deserve it, you know, who are the worse off first and worse. However, it will motivate some people who were maybe in, you know, maybe in the other camp doing a protest vote or whatever they were doing. And so I think that, you know, patience, we're going to have to be at once angry and crazy and loud and patient, because this, I think it's going to start to shift.
Or think bigger with a
Yeah.
grander vision, like Medicare for all, which is
Yeah.
what we really need in this country. We're the only, like, you know, Western nation that doesn't have it. I mean, think bigger so that we can explain it to people easier, and people might actually, you know, vote for us if we put it forth. I mean, I'm not so confident in the current Democratic minority we have in the Senate. They don't seem to be stopping hardly any of these cabinet appointments.
Well, I was happy that Schumer gave a pretty tough speech at the inauguration, where he actually mentioned sexual orientation and gender identity.
And
that was a shocker.
And was booed from the crowd.
Yes,
Of course, they were also chanting "Lock her up" when Hillary came out on the stage. I mean, it's just
and
unbelievable.
we were surprised as we were at the march in New York this past weekend to look down and see there was Chuck Schumer in the crowd. But meanwhile, he's voting for Pompeo to be the director of the CIA, and for all his tough talk, he doesn't have that much power, and he may not be able to do anything even if he wants to, and we're not sure how much he wants to. But I think it's important to take that point about people react when they are personally affected. You know, people got angry about the Vietnam War because of the draft. People got angry about AIDS because their lives were threatened. And a lot of this is going to be propelled by how much people feel personally affected.
And even the LGBT movement, I mean, it really ballooned when people started saying, wait, this is my, you know, straight people were saying, wait, this is my brother, this is my cousin, this is my daughter, this is my son. And so, you know, we'll see.
And Trump got elected because people felt he would personally help them get a job, get better health care, cheaper, or whatever. I think they're deluded, but...
I think he's deluded.
But I think that's why something like the Women's March is such a great opportunity to like understand what affects us personally and what affects the intersections that we identify with, and then all the people around us, right? So knowing that we came out in huge numbers for the Women's March, and then just yesterday there was another action in support of Standing Rock and the executive order now to push the Keystone pipelines to continue being built, and today there's one to be in solidarity with our Muslim brothers and sisters and siblings. So I think that knowing that as a group we're coming out for the Women's March, we have to continue that. Because when they were chanting at the Women's March, refugees are welcome here and Black Lives Matter, that was for everyone to join in. And that needs to continue from that moment.
But there's a lot of pressure from the top to divide and conquer, and not just the Trump people. You know, when I saw those pieces in the Times about white women are offended by the leadership of the march and think it's too much oriented to people of color, or they're not making pro-life women welcome in the march. And all of that was just divisive. Yeah. And I see commentators on television talking about, well, the speakers at the march in Washington were too divisive. And there's this whole attempt to divide, to downplay the effect of grassroots organizing and to disempower. The people in power, per usual, do not want to give up power. And that concerns me.
I hate the commentators who bring in the activists and they say, well, he's just taken office, you know, don't you want to wait and see what he does? I mean, first of all, the whole campaign told us, you know, how vile he was, and then virtually every single thing he's done since he's had an appointment and during the transition has been awful. So there's nothing to wait for. I mean, that's why jillions of people turned out on Saturday.
People don't want to take responsibility for acting, and so they excuse themselves by saying, "Just give him a chance. Give him a chance."
I do think also some people don't know what to do. There's so much, especially with social media. It's like, go to this march, go to this protest. I watch my 2 children, and they just, you know, they're bang, 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 and they're. But I'm like, just do something. Figure it out. Meet other people. Find your tribe. Find your crew, and get together and figure out where your place is. And that's what I say to my students too. Just don't sit around and get depressed.
Well, let's talk about that in more detail, because we do want to empower people.
Well, the ACLU didn't waste time suing the administration.
We did. We filed a FOIA lawsuit the day that he was inaugurated.
Freedom of Information Act about his
about any
Conflicts
any information that is relevant to a violation of the Emoluments Clause. So, is he getting income from foreign countries?
Which is against the Constitution.
He's not supposed to be doing.
And you're hoping to pry loose his taxes with that suit, right?
That would be arguably some information that would be responsive, yeah. So look, we'll see what kind of information we get or don't get in
And
response.
the ACLU and other organizations are getting a lot of support since the election by people who are horrified.
Which is encouraging, yes.
Yeah.
Well, you're finding the same thing at Make the Road. It was already a very active group, but has there been an increase?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been an increase of people just getting involved, of definitely just support coming from all levels. And I think Make the Roads, one of their first initial responses to this is to just educate our community, right? So what we've been doing is we've been organizing open hours or open sessions within our organization to inform and educate everyone on what's going on, because everything is happening so rapidly. There's so many executive orders, there's so many changes, so many things that are being kept hush-hush, that I think one of the most empowering things, if we're talking about empowering people or for them to act, is for them to understand like what's happening, how it's going to affect them, and how it's going to affect everybody around us and just our general culture and energy around us. So I think that's one of the first things that we're doing. We're trying to make sure that everybody understands like what, you know, the impact that these things will have right now.
And how are you encouraging people to educate themselves? Because I have to say, what has discouraged me over recent years is the levels of ignorance.
Yeah, and I think that this goes back to media, right, and to the news that are out there, where right now we're in a moment where we have almost an overwhelming amount of information. We're saturated with news and information. Just our social media, my feed, there's a different thing every minute, and they're all coming from similar perspectives, because we unfortunately happen to live in like media bubbles sometimes, depending on what we surround ourselves with, but we're saturated with so much information. So I think, you know, having groups of people that get together, sort of what we're doing in our group, in our Globe group, is every Friday we're getting together, and the first thing we're going to do is analyze things that have happened, trying to have a clear understanding of what that means. We're starting off all our meetings with that, just to know what's going on in the environment. So I think similarly, people need to try to, you know, as much as we can, try to find real factual information, facts rather than alternative facts, and break that down, maybe with each other, maybe through looking at multiple sources, knowing what's credible. There's so much fake news out there. So I think sorting through that is really important. And it's going to be difficult because we're so saturated, but maybe it's a collective effort in a way.
James, what do you find yourself doing different in the wake of this now, in terms of the cases that you're looking at, taking on, et cetera? Because you have pending cases, you have...
Yeah, well, so the litigation hasn't changed much in the sense that I think that, I mean, the only thing different about the litigation is that we're trying to figure out, okay, you know, if we're gonna do X, if we're gonna try and create this piece of law, we better do that quickly. We gotta move that stuff forward because now is the moment. It's only the courts are likely to get worse. But we also work outside of the courtroom. We work in legislatures and Congress and the state legislatures, and we do education work and do organizing work. And on that front, we're trying to focus more on media and education work, again, to get out information that we think is correct, and also to mobilize people and just to make people realize, look, you can make a difference. You can engage in the following different ways. We have a very large action email list that we use both for actions at the state legislative level and in Congress. And if anybody wants to sign up for that, aclu.org, and you can just sign up for the info alerts, and you will start getting stuff that is a way to take action, a way to express your views to the legislatures, but also just to make sure that we do this work to make noise and mobilize mobilize the support that is out there for progressive causes, including LGBT causes. Because if we don't mobilize that, we have no chance in the legislative arenas.
And when you mobilize people, do you think, we think traditionally of phone calls to elected officials, marches, whatever. What do you think works? What do you think is important for people to do?
Look, I think the single most impactful thing that people can do, certainly, I think at the legislative level in Congress and in the states, is call. A lot of what we have is stuff where it's like, okay, send an email to, or sign a petition that we will deliver to. That is helpful. But if you want to make a difference, call your representative's office, speak to somebody. They keep tallies of how many calls they get pro and against different things.
And their phone lines get clogged,
yes,
too.
that makes a difference. If advocacy groups turn out a bunch of people, the Hill notices. I'm not saying this is dispositive, but it makes a difference, and it makes more difference than liking something on Facebook.
We showed a video last week of the 100 people who went to Colorado representatives meeting and drove him out the back door because he just couldn't handle them.
So
and I think showing up is...
The least we can do, folks, is learn the names of all your representatives who represents in the U.S. House. You've got 2 U.S. senators, you've got maybe city council and state legislators. Learn their names, learn their numbers, keep it by your desk, and when something comes up, make that call about this. So that we can move on, because state legislatures, even in the more liberal states, are going to have to make up for some of these cuts that are coming down from the feds.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Linda, what do you think is appropriate action or organizing?
Well, what really cheers me is I teach at a very diverse college, and so people are in affinity groups. They're in the LGBT group. They're in the black group. They're in the brown group. And then we have the group that does sort of activist media. And then you look at that group and it looks like the UN. And we get into the most intense arguments, and we have, articles about every kind of, issue, all their issues. Everybody's stuff gets covered because we're in the room together. And I think that is what really struck me. It's like, we really need to find a way to pull together and, whatever it is, just find your people, and they don't have to be exactly like you, and they shouldn't be, and figure out what you're going to do. Because how we have been successful is when we all do our part. And I applaud everyone here for what you're doing, and it's really important, and it's important for you to do something different from what you do, but that we're all doing it.
And don't be afraid of that difference in the room.
That's right. Or the conflict.
Yeah, I personally really like the impromptu queer dance party that happened in front of Mike Pence's house.
Yes,
I love that. I think that is a very creative way to do a direct action, and I think that we have to start thinking about creative ways to do direct action. For instance, we as an organization are going to have an impromptu march as well today in Jackson Heights because of all the executive orders and all the intersecting identities that are going to be affected by that.
On the immigration orders.
Immigration orders specifically. But with that, we're also going to be giving out information while we do the march. So I think combining efforts is also really important. So we're not only going to be visible and out on the street, but we're also going to be giving out Know Your Rights pamphlets and information about different organizations. And I think combining different direct actions, educational opportunities, I think it's the only way it's going to be effective.
I mean, you're doing life and death stuff. I mean, you're creating sanctuaries for people
Right.
who are in danger of being deported and things like that.
And I think that's actually a really important point because sanctuary spaces, sure, they exist within organizations, that goes without being said, but there's other spaces that are actually becoming sanctuary spaces that understand what that means and the responsibility that entails, and that can be, just a community center, or it could be someone's house if they have that space. So thinking about that in ways outside of what currently exists, but trying to build ourselves and to keep ourselves safe.
We all have to be sanctuaries for each
But
other.
I take your point about humor and cleverness too. As an ACT UP veteran, a lot of our success was because we were clever in our messaging, and standing on that bridge over 42nd Street and seeing hundreds of thousands of people slowly come along. So many of the signs were so funny and so clever. And it was fun. Activism has to be fun, and people have to do it for their own selfish good feelings and work together for the greater good. But they have to have a good time doing it, and do it because they want to do it, not just because they think they should do it.
And humor gets under his skin.
I was going to say, that's actually his biggest weakness.
Yes.
He's very weak when it comes to poking fun at him. So I think that has to be also included in our organizing strategies.
That's right.
Wow. All right, well, we're down to our last minute. Any final thoughts?
I wanted to say one thing that's really important, and we sort of got at this, is to look back at the success we've had in the past. Because I was thinking about, there's a lot of talk about ACT UP and the success, the ways it was successful, and the strategies, including humor and direct action. And look at that and think about it and adapt it for this day and age. And also celebrate that, this worked.
Mm-hmm. James?
Don't lose hope. We can do this.
Oh, that's good
Yeah,
to hear.
I mean, I want to encourage people to be militant. I want people to be militant, aggressive. I think now is a time to really support each other and remember all the shared identities that we all have.
Well, it's a few days into the administration, and I felt terrible, but now I feel a little better.
And I think I learned my original organizing principles by watching the civil rights movement on TV.
Yes.
And I would recommend people go to YouTube and watch Eyes on the Prize, all 8 or 10 episodes or whatever. But I look back to the anti-war marches in the 70s for critical mass. So everybody do something, do whatever appeals to you. But let's all fight back.
Thank you for being with us, Linda, James, and Pau. Thank you.
We really appreciate all your thoughts and all your work, and please come back and we'll reassess as we go along.
Thank you.
Okay, and
We'll be back next week.
We will see all of you next week, and hang in there. It's going to be okay. I hope.
Kind of.
Yeah, kind of. It's exactly right.
Okay.